Howdy, howdy. I have a big stack of books that I set aside to look into. I process hundreds of books as a seller. First up is a book called The Pathless Trail by a guy named Arthur O. Friel, who was a really popular pulp writer, who was the South American correspondent, or one of them, for the Associated Press, and worked as quote-unquote an explorer for some time. So wrote in the lost civilization subgenre of pulp, from a place of relative authority and experience. And this is the first book in a sequence of 4 books. This was published as part of the Time Lost series from Centaur Press, which ran for a few years, would only put out a handful of books every year, and there really aren't that many of them. They would reprint pulp stories to try to repopularize them. This is from 1969. Despite having the Jeff Jones cover, which is really pretty, and looking like a fantasy book, this is not. This is just adventure, pulp stuff about an expedition trying to recover the lost heir to a great fortune in the Amazonian jungle and running afoul of some cannibal tribes. Not the kind of thing I'm interested in reading personally, but I will pass this along. It is aesthetically a great book. Speaking of aesthetics, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion by Yukio Mishima. Mishima was a Japanese writer who was most popular during the 1950s and 60s. A notorious figure who definitely courted public attention and is remembered, in part at least, for being a fascist. And I've read him and reviewed him on the channel a couple of times. I will peg him probably as one of maybe 3 right-wing writers who I actually like. One of the best writers I've ever read. His prose is just unbelievable. And I've not actually read all that much from him, and this is supposed to be one of his standout works. It's based on true events. In 1950, a young man burned down a temple in Japan, and this is a fictionalized retelling of those events, in which the guy who's socially ostracized and has a stutter is obsessed with this temple as an icon of physical perfection and beauty, and eventually burns it down in a symbolic act. The price sticker is in yen. So this is an uncommon book generally, and this printing is especially uncommon. I think this is probably not gettable for less than 30 bucks to my memory. So I'm gonna hang on to this and eventually read it. I don't have plans to read Mishima really anytime soon, but he is one of the weirdest characters in lit, certainly. This one looks like a gem, and I think this is gonna be the second keep. It's The Water of the Wondrous Isles by William Morris, a really, really important writer who I have never personally read. He influenced everybody in fantasy directly or by way of inheritance from those authors. C.S. Lewis, Edison, Tolkien, all the big people, James Joyce, were all influenced directly by William Morris, who's this amazing figure from the 19th century, wrote his stuff in the late 1800s, is not actually best remembered as a fiction writer, is best remembered as the father of the arts and crafts movement. Isn't really read all that much anymore, I don't think, except as this historical touchstone. But this is supposed to be one of his more accessible books. His other more famous fantasy works, like The Well at World's End and The Wood Beyond the World, or something like that. I'll put the book up here. Those were written to try to revive the tradition of medieval romances, and written in that medieval style. I think probably a move later borrowed by, what's his face? Why can I never remember his name? The Nightland. William Hope Hodgson. This one apparently was not written in that style, and consequently is a little bit easier to read. It's about a young woman protagonist named Bird Alone, which is one of the best character names I think I've ever heard, who is adopted by a witch and then eventually freed from her bondage to go pursue her one true love through an enchanted world of magic, hopping from island to island in a ship and encountering various magical creatures and perils, apparently told in a cyclical style that gets redundant, but we've been to the Nightland, and we know that that can actually be pleasurable to read. No, it can't. I'm remembering the Nightland. But we forgive them their trespasses, And I think that probably this will end up being the Morris that I read first because Well at World's End is really long. And then The Mind Cage by Van Vogt. So Van Vogt is famous for a number of reasons. One of his big claims to fame is that he invented the fix-up novel. This is unusual in that it was published during a period of peak productivity in terms of output of the original fix-up novels. A fix-up is a novel that is constituted of short stories originally published in magazines and then jammed together to make one, I was about to say cohesive narrative. In the case of Van Vogt, it isn't always the case that it's cohesive, but sometimes written up, touched up with interstitial stuff to make it work as a novel. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but Van Vogt was first out of the gate, and this is not one of those. He wrote this based on a 5-page long short story, and apparently it's a mess, which is another thing that Van Vogt is famous for, is writing stuff that is hard to follow, that sort of can't support its own weight, is confusing, is overly ambitious, is messy. He was, incidentally, the main influence on Philip K. Dick and his style. I really like Van Vogt. I have become a partisan for him. Not all of his stuff is good, but a lot of it is intermittently great, which is the same exact way I feel about PKD. So if you like PKD, I recommend Van Vogt. I have not read this one, but it looks interesting. It's a dystopian novel that some person online credited with possibly being a major influence on the whole Butlerian jihad subplot of Dune, because this is a cautionary tale about the dangers of quote-unquote thinking machines, an early anti-artificial intelligence story about this guy in a dystopian world who is sentenced to death, and at the last minute before he's executed, swaps minds with another man. I think I'm going to let this copy go because I'm not going to get around to it for a long time. I am selling the ones that I don't keep on Whatnot, which is an auction platform, and I sell tons and tons and tons of books. I have a huge haul of these old pocket books, which is what I'm now focused on selling almost exclusively. So if you're interested in any of these, or just old sci-fi books generally, there is a link below that gets you $15 in credit with only a couple of strings attached. They still make you pay for taxes and shipping, but it ships media mail because it's books, so it's pretty cheap. And I'm going to be doing lots and lots of auctions. So if you want some quote-unquote, scare quotes, free or deeply discounted books, then that costs you nothing up front, at the very least. Next is Daughter of the Bright Moon by Lynn Abbey. Sword and sorcery stuff with a premise that doesn't really necessarily grab me. It does have a female protagonist, which was still not that common when it was published in 1979, and it has lots of pretty illustrations in it, but the plot otherwise seems a little bit generic. I don't know, it didn't quite grab me. It's a warrior woman who rides a unicorn. The interesting thing about this book is the backstory of how Lynn Abbey got into publishing in the first place. So she had been a writer, an aspirant writer, for quite a while before she volunteered to pick Gordon R. Dixon up from the airport to bring him as a guest of honor to a science fiction convention. Got into a car accident that injured her, I believe, quite badly, and Gordon Dixon was so conscience-stricken that he decided to take her under his wing and nurture her writing career and voluntarily proofread and give notes to her writing. This is her first book, and this is the product of that collaborative effort. And some people really do like this book. I can't vouch for it, but the backstory was neat, I thought. Starship and Haiku by Somtao Suchardik-kun is his first science fiction book. Really pretty book in a timescape with, I think, no, I was going to say Vincent de Fate, but it is not. It's a daily cover, D-A-L-Y, really great cover art. He's actually most famous as a composer. Really interesting guy who I've never read. He also published under the name, or publishes, I should say, under the name S.P. Somtao. This book takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where Japan is the last man standing, is the last remaining civilization that's still operative and relatively functional in the world, but culturally is obsessed with its own destruction and seeks some kind of spiritual absolution in its psychic communication with whales. It just sounds nuts. I may not be doing that complete justice. The plot synopsis was so crazy that I kind of glazed over it. I was just like, yeah, I'm definitely keeping this. It's just too crazy to not own a copy of. But even if that description is not fully accurate, even if it's 75% of the way there, that is a book that I would like to read. Merlin's Ring by H. Warner Munn. One of the reasons why I skim certain books off the inventory to research is because I will have seen somebody's name a bunch of times, and Munn is one of those. Typically find him in old Ace editions. I found a bunch of copies of what I have now learned are the first 2 books in this series, this trilogy that was originally intended to be a 4-book series, but Munn died in the midst of writing book number 4. The first 2 books are The King of the World's Edge and The Ship from Atlantis. This whole sequence is about what happens to King Arthur's entourage after he dies. And this might be triggering a certain response in you, a certain association. It's got wraparound art from Gervasio Gallardo, and it sure does look like one of these. Same artist. This is the Ballantine Adult Fantasy line, an example of it, and this is not. This is from Del Rey. The BAFs, when they suspended operations, when the series ended, it transferred over to Del Rey for a period of time. I think this might be the first crossover, so it is in the uncanny valley of looking like Ballantine Adult Fantasy, but not technically being one. This is also notable in that it's allegedly Munn's best book, and it is written way late in his career. He was a Weird Tales writer, pulp writer, published a bunch of stuff in the 20s and 30s, was a contemporary of Lovecraft, was apparently an influence on Robert E. Howard. This was published originally in 1974. It's apparently great. It's written in a pre-Tolkien style, which doesn't really mean anything, but it kind of does. We all kind of know what that means. And I like that kind of high mythic, mytho-poetic style in my fantasy writing. So this is something that I could see reading, especially because, at least according to a few people, you don't need to have read the other 2 books for this to make sense. But it's another one that I probably am not going to deliberately read for a while, so I'm going to pass that one along. Master of the Etrax by Robert Lory, another person that I've seen a bunch of times. He apparently worked for a big chunk of his career doing PR stuff for oil and gas companies, boo hiss, but this book actually looks pretty interesting. It's got the Jeff Jones cover, and apparently the contents are not as grim and heavy and sword and sorcery-y as the aesthetics would lead you to believe. This is compared frequently to the Kugel stories from Jack Vance. It's picaresque fantasy writing written in a humorous tone about a protagonist named, what is it, Bureau or something? No, it's Hamper. The main character's name is Hamper, which I don't know. That makes me smile. It's supposed to be good. It's supposed to not be as good as Vance, but you know, who wrote picaresque fantasy that was better than Jack Vance? I'm sure you have a few candidates, but I don't. Really cool looking, really pretty book. It's supposed to be decent. Another of 80,000 science fiction and fantasy books that I would read if I had unlimited time. The Eyes of Bolsk by, once again, Robert Lory, which is a planetary romance starring a CIA agent whisked away to an alien world by time-traveling aliens. It's supposed to suck. It gets negative reviews almost universally, but there was one reviewer I saw who was very complimentary in comparing it to Jack Vance and also Michael Moorcock, although he said, it does suck, but it's sucky in an interesting way. And it's doubled up with this also really cool looking Space Barbarians by Mack Reynolds. It's supposed to be okay. Mack Reynolds is generally supposed to be okay. I'm interested in him for his biography. I think a little bit more than his writing, but I've never read him. I would be curious to do so. I will eventually. This is another really gratifying find. It's Ibis by Linda Steele. Not to be confused with the Linda Steele who married Michael Moorcock. This Linda Steele only ever published one book, this one novel and one short story. This is about a human expedition that crash lands on this planet called Ibis 2 that's home to a humanoid hive ruled by an elite of sentient females. Everybody else is a mindless drone worker, and the human captain falls in love with the queen of this hive and has split allegiances. It's supposed to be good. It's described as a science fiction romance, and I think the more contemporary usage of romance. This is the kind of thing I'm trying to find. Something that I never would have paid attention to before, that's completely off the radar, that looks interesting and looks worth reading. Again, my TBR is a nightmare, so I'm not going to read it, but I am going to sell it, and hopefully that lives up to its limited but positive reputation. This is another complete obscurity, Slater's Planet by Harris Moore. That's a pen name from two different writers, Alfred Harris and Albert Moore. Harris was a Canadian screenwriter, wrote teleplays, and I don't know anything about Moore. This is a forgotten book, gets compared to Star Trek a lot. It's about a human expedition that encounters a strange world. I can't say anything more about it without spoiling it. I don't know, apparently the technology is extremely dated, but some people do praise it as being very Star Trek-like and being an entertaining read. I don't know, I don't think that I would probably spend the time on this, but it is an interesting oddity. Another interesting oddity, or at least an oddity, The Lost Land by Edison Marshall. He's a, again, forgotten pulp writer. And guess what his middle name was? It's Tesla. So Edison Tesla Marshall, which is one of the funniest writer names. Maybe Manly Wade Wellman is funnier, but Edison Tesla Marshall is definitely up there. And that is, again, Gervasio Gallardo cover, and maybe unconsciously I was setting his covers aside because he is one of the best ever. This book was originally published as Dion of the Lost Land in the 1930s, serialized in one of the pulps, and it's another lost civilization story about a valley in Antarctica where there are warring tribes of Cro-Magnons. It's not Cro-Magnons, is it? It's got to be Cro-Magnons. It is, reportedly. Extremely racist, has a eugenics focus, many such cases during this time, but such a pretty book, and it's not a common book either. I don't, again, think that I would read it personally, but tempted to keep it just because I've never seen it before. I don't know if I'm going to see it again, and I'm a Gallardo enjoyer, but so is everybody else, so probably going to end up selling that one too. Charles Harness with Firebird. This is right in the pain spot of, it sounds interesting enough to keep and read. Brian Aldiss described Harness, along with A.E. Van Vogt, as writing quote-unquote widescreen Baroque science fiction, which he meant, I think, as praise, and the Science Fiction Encyclopedia entry for Harness is saying basically, like, why isn't this guy famous? The premise sounds completely insane. It's about a cycle of Big Bang leading to an eventual big crunch, which is a theory that's since been disproven. But in this story, that's not the case. So the universe is continuously expanding and contracting. And in one of the iterations of the universe, there's two AIs who come up with a plan to monkey wrench the physics of the universe in order to prevent the destruction of their universe. And there are cat people. This is one that I think I wouldn't be super disappointed to land on a random pick. Seekers of Tomorrow by Sam Moskowitz. Moskowitz I know as an anthologist more than as a critic, but that's not the history. That's not actually his main contribution. He was deep in the fandom and was considered to be one of the world authorities in the history of science fiction and wrote a lot of nonfiction and biography about science fiction writers and a lot of criticism. And this is a collection of what were originally articles written about individual science fiction writers, retooled as entries in this book, little biographical snapshots and critical commentary about a lot of the big names. I get the impression he's someone for whom a lot of these writers had a sort of begrudging respect, but that could be wrong. You know, this is ultimately kind of cursory research. I would be very interested to read this, though. I'm trying to read more nonfiction and commentary and criticism in science fiction and about science fiction. And this is a follow-up book to a book called Explorers of the Infinite that was also a series of vignettes, but about the proto-SF writers, the earlier people, not people who were his contemporaries at the time. People like Bradbury Clark, Philip Jose Farmer, Asimov, Van Vogt. Dinosaur Planet by Stephen Leigh, I think. Typically it's pronounced Lee, right? Possibly Leigh. This is book 2 in the Ray Bradbury Presents series or Dinosaur series. This is a sequel to a book called Dinosaur World. I bought this because look who it is. It's Wayne Barlow. And I guess he did illustrations possibly for the first of the Dinosaur books. Oh yeah, there are illustrations in here. Are these Barlow? That doesn't look like Barlow. No, those are John Paul Genzo. So I guess Barlow did the internal illustrations, but not the cover for book 1, but did the cover for this one. And it looks like one other of the Dinosaur books. And I am collecting every Barlow piece of art I can get my hands on, every book with a Barlow cover. There are lots of them. I don't have an actual checklist I'm working off of because I like being pleasantly surprised. The series itself is sort of interesting looking. Book 1, someone on Goodreads described as an existential slipstream novel, which is surprising. It's some alternate dimension thing about sapient talking dinosaurs. Leigh is a creative writing professor and also a musician. I've never read him before. I don't really know a ton about him, but that's going in the collection. Dianna Wynne Jones with The Tough Guy, The Fantasyland. This is a semi-famous book that was redone in 2006. And Dianna Wynne Jones is probably best remembered for being the original author of Howl's Moving Castle. It was a trilogy of YA books published in, I think, the 70s or 80s. And this is a satire of the fantasy genre and cliches in fantasy, written as a tour guide to Fantasyland, a place where all of the famous fantasy properties coexist. It could be good. I'm not going to keep it, but sort of a famous book. Book I am definitely keeping is Tour Double of Souls by Joanna Russ with Houston, Houston, Do You Read by James Tiptree Jr. This made a nearly clean sweep of the awards the year that it was published. Won a Hugo and a Locus and was nominated for a Nebula for Best Novella. It's about an abbess who is forced to dissuade a raiding party of Viking men before they destroy her and the Abbey. It's supposed to be great. It looks really good. I've never read a Russ that I didn't love. And I want to read the Tiptree that I really love. I read a collection of her earliest short stories and didn't really like it, but this looks a lot better. It's about a ship staffed only with men who is intercepted on one of their journeys by a ship full of women. Supposed to be surprisingly vulgar and very good. Also won a bunch of awards. I think that this is going to be a winner. I'm going to possibly even read this next, actually. I'm trying to be more precise with the titles that I pick, and that is pretty high up there. The Very Slow Time Machine is a short story collection by Ian Watson. I've talked about him before on the channel. I've not read him. It's supposed to be very good. A lot of people criticize these stories for not having potent endings, which recommends the book to me. One of my favorite things about Margaret St. Clair is her ability to write really great science fiction short stories that don't have punchy endings, that kind of trail off, which is something that he's criticized for here. And that's always a nice, refreshing change from the twist ending that was really common in science fiction short stories. These are supposed to be really good and kind of funny, especially the title story. I didn't dig too much into the plot synopses of the individual stories. It is criticized as being a little bit rough around the edges with its treatment of gender and race. Am I going to hang on to that one? I don't know. I'll have to think about it because I don't know that I've encountered a copy of this before and it looks promising. I am going to keep this one though, The Enquiries of Dr. Eszterhazy by Avram Davidson. This is about a paranormal investigator who I think maybe was modeled after Sherlock Holmes, who is looking into supernatural claims in a fictionalized Europe of the 19th century where there's this fictionalized country in the Balkans that's home to possible werewolves and spooks and ghouls. It's a dozen short stories. They're the first in this long-running series that's one of his longest running. And this is another case like Tiptree of this just sniffs as maybe the book that would hook me on this author that I feel like I should be more into than I really am. Because I've read Davidson before, it didn't really grab me, but I keep seeing again and again people comparing him to people like Lafferty as this high magus of bizarre science fiction and fantasy writing that defies genre. And I just haven't gotten that from Davidson yet, but this is supposed to be excellent. And I feel like this is possibly a little bit more accessible and a little bit more fun than something like Phoenix in the Mirror, which is his best known work. And I have never seen a copy of this before. I don't think it's super common. And I don't know, it just looks like it's probably pretty good, in no small part because it has that awesome cover. One of the nice things about spending years and years living in a big pile of old science fiction books is that when you see something odd, it probably means that it's actually odd, that it's actually obscure. This is an example. Rust, by an author named R.C. Califf, also known as Ruth Califf, and that is the extent of the information that is available online about R.C./Ruth Califf. This is, as far as I can tell, her only science fiction book. There is one review anywhere online that I could find. It's a 1-star review on Goodreads saying it's one of the worst things they had ever read. I don't regret picking it up because it has a Bruce Pennington cover, which I didn't realize until I took a closer look at it. That is a work of art that is also on the cover, one of the covers for Revolt in 2000 by Robert Heinlein. This book is from 1980. It's a first print. It's in decent condition. And it appears to be a retelling of the Adam and Eve myth in a post-apocalyptic world where everything is covered in a layer of nuclear debris, the color of rust. Probably gonna sell this one just because I can't turn over every stone that I find like this. So this will be read by somebody and you will be the second person potentially to ever render an opinion about that online. And I hope that you do, whoever gets this, because I'm sort of curious about it. And then finally, this inauspicious looking library-bound hardcover that was originally a New Directions paper book of The Castle of Argyle by Julien Gracq, who is a French surrealist writer. Reading about this book makes me want to read it immediately. It sounds a lot like what I imagine Gormenghast is, having not read Gormenghast. It's about a young guy who buys a castle nestled in this impossibly large forest in which supernatural forces may dwell, and 2 of his friends join him in this castle where they experience these hallucinatory sequences of bizarre occurrences. And apparently it's about Hegel, which I'm not even going to pretend to be excited about. But a lot of reviewers have the same note, which is it's the best purple prose they'd ever read. Apparently there is only 1 line of dialogue in the entire thing. I'm going to read this at some point. I just can't resist. That is the bottom of the stack. If you saw anything that you wanted here, it'll be up for auction on the Whatnot. Details will be below. Also, if you want more stuff from me, I have a Patreon. I upload videos there all the time. Mostly book review videos with a little bit of other stuff. I talk about movies and music and so on. So if that's of interest to you, link is below also. But if not, no worries. I'll see you somewhere at some point, hopefully. Appreciate you watching this one, and I'll see you soon.